Hey guys, it's me, Mr. 250, and welcome back to Banshee's Last Cry. Now, last time, we finished off by, going through the rest of this route, and we got done in by grace. Not a great ending, obviously, but a good way to start the game, I'd feel. So, the only problem with this game is that there are about, I think, 14 endings in the main story, and I would say about half of them are spoilery. Luckily, I've gone ahead and looked through all of these, and I figured out, I think, probably the best way for us to go through this. Now, unfortunately, it's going to require us to do a little bit more, and also another thing I wanted to add, I'm going to start going back to doing one of these every other day rather than two because I won't have time because I'm starting work again, as an FYI, but the good news is that a lot of these routes are fairly short, so we may be able to get multiple ones done in a single day. Now, unfortunately, this requires me to start from a point that we actually never reached. So let me start, I think right here is where we want to start. More or less. Okay, almost. So, if you remember, this was the section, I'm going to start skipping through this a bit. This is a section that we invite Grace into our room, and she's like, hey, will you stay with me? And we say yes, we talk for a bit, and we eventually fall asleep. Unfortunately, we wake up, Grace is gone. I'm gonna go through this a little bit quickly here. We hear a scream, and now, last time what we did was we decided to knock on the doors and call for help. This time, we're deciding that we need to get to Grace right away. I decided I needed to get to Grace right away. I gathered my courage and headed downstairs. Did these stairs always make so much noise? Each step I took was like a drumbeat. Fearing the worst, I made my way to the first floor. There was no one there. I went to the entranceway and peeked into the drying room. What I saw made my heart leap into my throat. The door to the cellar was open. A burst of adrenaline pumped through my veins, my pulse pounding in my ears. Grace? My voice was like a dried-up croak that didn't sound like my own. Did Mr. Buchanan escape from the cellar? But how? Or did someone open the lock and go in? And if so, why? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of frantic, hurried footsteps that nearly caused me to leap out of my skin. I turned quickly around. It was Grace. She came running up and stopped suddenly, nearly crashing into me. Max! Her face was a mixture of surprise and relief. Grace, what happened? But instead of answering, she threw herself into my arms and hugged me fiercely. I held her firmly, hoping I could somehow calm her trembling. Tell me what happened. I heard a scream. Was that you? My aunt and uncle, they... That was enough. I knew what she was going to say, but I wasn't ready to admit it. There had been another attack, this time in the forest. How could this be? More innocent lives snuffed out? This couldn't still be happening. You mean they... Grace, her face buried in my chest, could only silently nod her head. Buchanan. Where was Buchanan? Could he have escaped from the cellar and murdered them? Alright, so I don't believe last time we got an option to actually choose where we wanted to go. And this route's actually interesting for that. I mean, a lot of these routes are, but the choice between waking everybody up or going directly to Grace is what gives us these options. Is that we get the option to decide where we want to go. And that's important for later routes. But the biggest thing I'd like to point out about this is that in the first time, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a lot of things, like contradictory things that Max already knew that he later somehow forgot, like why so-and-so couldn't be the killer. But yet he later suspected them anyway. And it's kind of interesting for that if you think about it, because Max basically in our last route, he didn't do a lot of thinking. He thought for a bit, but when things started to get really hectic, he kind of blanked out and then just kept blaming everybody. But now, we're going to slow down a little bit, and these first few routes I've chosen will not give us very many clues, but you will notice a few more things that he didn't talk about last time. Alright, so I believe we need to check to see if Buchanan is in the cellar. I'm not sure on this one. If you see a video cut here, that means I made a mistake and I'm backing up. Okay, sorry, I did get a little bit confused, but I do believe this is the correct route. So, we go down here. Now, this is going to be exactly the same as before. We find Buchanan dead on the floor. Grace freaks out, I believe like before. If not, feel free to, if I'm accidentally skipping through something, and I in fact did not read it, feel free to pause and read it. Sorry, ahead of time. Okay, I stopped at the entranceway long enough, and we had to tell the survivors. It is, I'm having to do a lot of this off of memory, so apologies if I do screw anything up, but feel free to pause and read if you haven't seen this. But most of this is very similar. So we knock on everybody's door, and we find the girls. We find Amber, and, okay, so I do believe this is a little bit different. Let's see. Amber opened the door and came out. Amber, your husband, I didn't have the heart to finish the sentence. Grace started to cry again, turning away. Our reaction was enough to tell the story. All the blood dripped from Amber's face, and she leaned heavily against the wall. Anxiously, I started towards her, but she waved me off with her free hand. I'm all right. My husband, where is he? In the cellar. And, I'm not sure if this is it, but I'm not going to read all of it just in case. We tell her that everybody downstairs is dead, pretty much. And, we don't think that they're the killers, so we decide to lock ourselves in with them. And then we remember Faberge. We go into Faberge's room and we find him yet again dead. Which is unfortunate. So we think it may be a natural but still murderous death. We think Bobby is the killer now. I believe this is where I can start to head for the right area. I'm supposed to take that route. I'm not going to act scared in front of Grace. If Grace hadn't been watching me, I probably would have cried like a baby and run as far away from there as possible, even into the blizzard. I'm not what anyone would call brave, and I certainly didn't have much confidence in a fight. But as long as Grace was there, I didn't want to look like a coward. We should at least warn Amber and the girls, I said slowly, trying to stop my voice from shaking. Then, we should go and check on your aunt and uncle. No, I can't look at that again. Shaking her head insistently, Grace was nearly hysterical with emotion. Then, I remembered the horrible scream of when she had first seen the bodies. Of course she doesn't want to see a nightmare like that again. I wasn't eager to have a look either. Okay, you go and stay with the girls in their rooms. What about you, Max? You're going to go alone? Don't worry, I'll be back soon. I tried to sound confident, but I'd never been more afraid in my life. We went to the girls' room and knocked on the door. Please, open up. I want you to let Grace stay with you for a little while. There was nothing but silence from the other side. Just when I started to think I was wasting my time, the door opened. Just Grace? Molly sounded exhausted. Yeah, I'm going to have a look below. Okay, come on in. Head downcast, Grace went in. But before the door closed, I said, don't let Bobby in no matter what, okay? There was no answer, but I figured I was understood well enough. I took a deep breath and headed towards the basement. Wow, I didn't even notice that. That was spelled weird. I inched forward one slow, careful, quiet step at a time. The once cheerful inn had been transformed into a nightmarish landscape. Blind corners, dark, creeping shadows everywhere. I felt like Bobby was lurking somewhere waiting for me. Mr. Buchanan, Amber, are you there? I shouted from the door down into the cellar below. I don't know how many times I turned and looked behind me. Finally, Amber came up. She didn't appear to be crying, but her face was so white that I expected her to collapse at any moment. I could breathe a little easier at least. I'm glad you're alright. Look, it's too dangerous to be alone. I want you to go stay in the girls' room. But it was as if she hadn't heard a word I'd said. She continued past me, slowly walking through the hallway like a wandering ghost. I was still concerned about her, but I decided I should go and check on the forests. Holding a mop handle I picked up off the floor near the entrance, I entered the dining area, carefully searching under the table to make sure Bobby wasn't hiding there. And, I think this was similar here. Yeah, we still saw Mr. Force, in fact. Yeah. Yeah, so okay, so we never saw these guys before, gotcha. And this is where things start getting important. Now let me scroll back to what I'm supposed to be here. When I passed the back entrance, I noticed there was something that looked like blood in the doorknob. What was it doing there? I stopped to have a closer look and saw that it wasn't just on the doorknob. There were also dark red tracks on the floor. Now keep in mind, this is something that could have happened last time, but our brave hero Max was a bit too busy freaking out and not paying very good attention, which is something that I'd like, it's something that's important to realize, that Max was freaking out so much he never bothered really to look for clues at this point in the game, at this point in the story. So I swallowed heavily and approached the door. Mindful of the blood. I gingerly put my hand on the knob and turned. It was locked. Which meant that Bobby hadn't fled through here, right? So after he killed the Forest, he just happened to brush the doorknob as he ran past? No, I thought. There was far too much blood for that. It was more like he intentionally grabbed it with a bloody hand. Let's see. And after carefully unlocking the door, I opened it with a small push. And I met with a roaring wind and a gust of snow. I winced for a moment, then spotted something red in the blood. Blood in the snow. But blood? A sickening amount of it had stained a clump of snow, making it look like a giant cherry snow cone. But whose blood was it? After recovering from the initial shock, I thought over the possibilities. If Bobby had killed Mr. and Mrs. Forrest, then, judging by the grisly scene I saw, he would have been splashed with at least some amount of blood. But it wouldn't have stained the snow like this. Was someone else killed? Or maybe the Forrest managed to injure Bobby before he could finish them off. Alright, and this is where my route starts. Okay, I've been having to do most of this by memory, but now I should be able to follow this guide. I made up my mind and decided to go out into the ferocious blizzard. By the light from the open door, I could just make out the trail of blood. Without proper boots, each step I took was a frozen hell, and my feet were rapidly becoming numb. After 5 or 6 steps, the light from inside no longer reached me, and I lost sight of the blood trail in the falling snow. I stopped and looked around, peering into the darkness. Just then, I saw 2 glowing beastly eyes. Before I could even react, a shadowy figure howled and leapt out at me. I didn't have time to swing the mop handle before I was thrown, face up on the ground. Something gripped my neck with savage strength and shoved my head into the snow. Who are you? I managed to croak with my last breath. As soon as I did, the hands around my throat released their grip, and I heard a voice that surprised me. Max? Is that you? It was Bobby, so he wasn't trying to kill me? Bobby? The weight on top of me suddenly disappeared, and I heard the sound of a body hitting the ground. Half mad with terror, I scrambled to my feet and could dimly make out the form of Bobby, lying collapsed in the snow. His forehead was dark with blood, and his face looked whiter than the snow itself. Bobby, the man I had thought slaughtered Buchanan in the forests. But now, here he was, lying bleeding in the snow. I had thought about running, but finally decided against it. Bobby, what the heck happened? The fiendish power I had felt a few seconds ago was gone. Now, he mumbled softly, like an old man on his deathbed. I knew it. I just knew it. You knew what? I shouted. He didn't seem to be listening. I heard noise. Went to look. Mr. Forrest's door was open. Someone hiding in the shadow smashed me in the head. I ran out the back. His breathing had become more labored, and his voice weakened as he spoke. Who was it? Bobby! I put my mouth closer to his ear and shouted desperately. I got away, but the door was locked. Freezing out here. I'm done, but stay alive, Max. Save them. The last bit of air rattled in his throat as he exhaled his last breath. Thanks, Bobby, for helping us out there, by the way. Bobby, who was it? Who did this? I grabbed his shoulders, already starting to disappear between a thin coating of snow, and shook them. He's dead, I thought. And even if he wasn't, there wasn't a doctor around for miles who could save him. I dragged Bobby's body back to the entrance. I had already left it open, so there was already a good-sized accumulation of snow in the doorway. Somehow, I managed to pull him to the front desk area, which was relatively warm. I put my head to his chest to listen for a heartbeat, but I couldn't detect even the faintest sound. Examining him more closely under the light, his face was that of a corpse. I was more confused than ever. So, Bobby wasn't the killer after all. Whoever killed him had also certainly killed the forest too. But who was it? Other than Grace and I, the only people left were Amber and the 3 girls. They were all women and none of them seemed particularly strong. How could one of them have violently killed both the forest and a young athletic guy like Bobby? And, now, keep in mind I'm following a route here. I obviously would like to take a look at Mr. Buchanan, but we're gonna let him go for right now. Even if it's impossible for one person, several people working together could do it, I realized with horror. So they're basically coming back to the same ideas last time. Oh no, I thought. Grace is with them right now. I roared past the front desk and raced towards the girls' room. I made it there in record time. Grace, open up, I shouted as I pounded on the door. From inside, I could hear voices arguing with each other, but the door opened right away. Grace threw her arms around my neck and buried her head in my chest. Oh, thank God, you're okay. I had been thinking the exact same thing. Where's Mr. Buchanan? I asked, avoiding meeting the eyes of the 3 girls. She never showed up. Oh, well, why don't we go back to our rooms? Pulling Grace by the arm, we exited the room. But isn't it safer if we all stay together? I ignored her, and without saying another word, led Grace back to my room. Hey, Max, what's with you? You said that it was safer if... I closed the door, held my finger up to her mouth, signaling her to keep quiet. Things have changed, Grace. Listen carefully. The killer isn't Bobby. Not Bobby? I nodded. Bobby was attacked too. His skull was crushed. When I found him, he was still barely breathing, but I couldn't go on. So I just shook my head. But who could have done it? Those 3 girls. It's the only possibility. For a moment, she seemed to accept my statement, but suddenly she started to laugh. Those girls? Kill someone in cold blood? Is that what you think? I know it's hard to believe, but there's no other explanation, is there? Do you think Amber Buchanan could have done it by herself? No. You see, that leaves only those 3 as the only possibility. There's no one else. Everyone else is dead. I shouted angrily at Grace, all my self-control gone now. Grace's face twisted up in a look of fear and hurt. I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. I don't want to either, but we can't turn ourselves away from reality. For a few moments, Grace just kept her head buried in my chest and cried. Finally, she looked up at me and softly spoke. Is it really true? Is everyone really dead? Bobby, my aunt and uncle, and Mr. Buchanan. You saw their bodies for yourself, right? I put my ear to Bobby's chest and I didn't hear any heartbeat. Just as I finished saying that, the lights in the room went out. Eek! Cannot do screeching. Grace screamed and clutched me more tightly. A power outage? I tried my best to not skip all the text, to keep the fear out of my voice, but I think it was pretty obvious I was scared too. The blackness around us was thick and oppressive. I couldn't even see Grace's face a few inches in front of me. It'll come back on soon, I'm sure. Besides, it's almost morning. Oh, I'm sure that's very reassuring. After some time passed, I was able to vaguely make out the shape of the window in Grace's face. Which, actually... That's not what I'm trying to do. Let me boost the brightness a bit. I didn't even think about that. Sorry. If it has been a little bit dark, I apologize. I forgot my phone automatically changes brightness. I should probably fix that for the future. After some time passed, I was able to vaguely make out the shape of the window in Grace's face. Grace and I held each other's hands tightly as we struggled to, and finally succeeded in navigating our way to the bed. Just stay still, I repeated over and over, trying to calm myself. Stay still and you'll be alright. Little by little, the feeling of panic receded. That is, until I heard the sound of a door opening, and a scream coming from outside the door. I was certain it was a woman's scream, but I didn't know whose. Just as the scream stopped, I heard the dull sound of some kind of impact. It sounded like a body hitting the floor. Oh no, could it be? Max, Grace whispered, her voice trembling. Mr. Buchanan's wife? Yes. In the rush to protect myself and Grace, I'd forgotten all about Amber. Maybe if I hurried, I could still save her. But despite that, my body felt frozen in place, unwilling to obey my commands. Were the three girls out there in the hall right now, kicking and beating her to death? Were they grinning ear to ear as they finished their grim work? I didn't hear any footsteps, but I thought I sensed a door opening and closing somewhere. Eventually, silence returned to the entire building, an eerie sort of silence, as if all life had been sucked away from the world. Max, go. Grace sobbed. Go find out what happened. Okay, I swallowed nervously. Maybe she's still breathing, like Bobby. But even if she was, I doubted there was anything we could do. Still, to stay here and do nothing would make me a coward. A living coward, I would like to add, but a coward nonetheless. Patting Grace reassuringly on the back, I stood up and made my way through the darkness to the door. My trusty mop handle was gripped firmly in my hand, in case they were waiting in ambush. I put ear up against the door to see if I could hear anything, but there was no hint of even faint breathing or the rustle of clothing. Silently, I gripped the knob and turned it ever so softly. Then, holding my body against the door so it couldn't be forced from the outside, I slowly pushed it open. Feeling certain no one had heard me, I craned my neck out of the door and peeked into the hallway. That's when I saw it. A crumpled body that appeared to be Amber lay in the hallway. It was dark and hard to see, but she didn't appear to be moving. I quickly closed the door, locked it, and turned towards Grace. Crap, I think she's dead. Grace began to quietly sob. Forgetting the need to move quietly, I rushed to her and held her gently by the shoulders. With each sob, I could feel her body tremble with fear. I thought that maybe, if I could just stop the trembling, I could stop her crying, too, so I gripped her shoulders with all my strength. Why? Why? They were all good people. Why did they have to die? As much as I wanted to comfort her, I had no answer. Grayson, nice typo, Grayson, calm down. If we don't calm down and think, we're never going to get out of here alive. You're saying those girls are going to kill us? I still can't believe it. Some kind of evil spirit is doing this, I know it. Or maybe some kind of demonic killer. A person, a normal person, could never do something this evil. An evil spirit. I didn't even want to admit the possibility. But the truth was that it was almost equally hard to believe that those three girls were vicious mass murderers. The next words out of her mouth surprised me. Those girls. We have to save them. Whoa, wait just a minute. I'm not going to go out there and get myself killed. We're not stepping 1 foot outside of this room. Grace stood up and made for the door, but I grabbed her and held on tight. So you're just going to sit back and watch them die? No, but what if they're killers? What then? As I said it, I suddenly remembered something important. Wait, they? What is it? When Bobby was dying, he said that someone hit him over the head. If all three of them had attacked, he wouldn't have used that word. Grace seemed to think about it for a minute. Then she stood up sharply. That's right. So they aren't the killers after all. We have to hurry and save them. Hey, hang on. It's dangerous out there. Besides, there are 3 of them, so they should be fine as long as they don't leave their room. You don't know that. They're just frightened girls. Is it okay with you if they're killed? I can't sit here and watch another innocent person die. I can't, and I won't. I felt the same way, After all, that's why I'd tried so hard to do what I could up to this point. But if there was one thing I was determined to do, it was to see that Grace wasn't hurt. No matter what it took, I was going to protect her. Even if those girls were innocent, if saving them meant exposing Grace to danger, I wasn't going to consider it. "Don't try to stop me." With surprising strength, Grace pushed me away and reached out to open the door. Okay, I'll go, so promise me you'll lock the door and stay here. No matter how long I'm gone, you have to promise me you won't come out, which is something Grace seems to be especially bad at. Grace seemed to struggle for a few moments, before resignedly nodding her head in agreement. "Okay, I promise. Just hurry back, and Max..." "Yeah? Please be careful." "Of course." Of course. Now, I'd like to point out, of course, obviously, this is very obvious to you guys at this point, but if the killer went and killed the Forests, and then he opened the door and got Buchanan, it's highly likely that the killer now has access to the master key, or at least the key for every room. I'd just like to point that out. I'm just saying, if anyone else has been wondering that. Once again, gripping the mop handle, I opened the door and slipped quietly out into the hallway. With a nod to Grace, the door closed, and I heard the sound of the lock engaging. Even with the window at the top of the stairs, it was darker than in the room. Moving as silently as I could, I crept down the stairs towards the girls' room. My heart was pounding like a hammer, and my mouth had gone dry. I stopped and quickly put my ear to the door. I couldn't hear a single sound from inside. Was Grace right? Did they have nothing to do with it? But for that to be true, there would have to be some kind of demonic monster, like Jason or Freddy, running around, killing people and then disappearing. I honestly wasn't sure which idea was more frightening. "Who is it?" I heard a faint whispered voice. "It's me, Max." "No, stay away!" Hearing the hysterical terror of Tiffany's voice, I began to think that she couldn't possibly be the cold-blooded killer I was looking for. "Don't be afraid. It looks like Miss Buchanan was attacked in the hallway a few minutes ago. You three, me and Grace, are the only people left. We have to work together or we're all going to be killed. Let's join forces, okay? We'll all stay together in one of our rooms." "No, you can't fool me that easily." She thought I was the murderer. I wasn't surprised. After all, I'd thought the same thing about them. I tried to think of some way to convince her, but I quickly gave up. It was impossible. "Okay, then just listen to me. Whoever comes to your door, do not open it. Grace and I will be in the other room, so if you feel like you're in danger, just yell, preferably scream really loudly. Okay, well..." Just then, I heard a scream. From behind me. Grace. I turned around, but couldn't see anything moving in the darkness. "Who was that?" Tiffany asked through the door. But I had no time to answer. I was already running back to my room. "Grace!" I made it back to my room, nearly colliding with the wall in the dark. The door was slightly open, and for a few moments, I just stared at it in shock. Why was the door open? I stood there frozen, afraid of what I might find inside. "Grace, please answer me." But the only answer from inside was a bone-chilling silence. Using the mop handle, I pushed open the door. The inside was slightly brighter than the hallway, but not enough to allow me to see if she was there. What could have happened to Grace to make her scream like that? She probably saw a mouse or a cockroach or something. No. "Grace," I yelled as loud as I could, but there was no answer. My legs were shaking. I could barely stand. Step by step, I inched forward into the room. As I came closer, I began to make out a dark, blurry shape lying on the bed. Is that Grace? No. Shakily, I approached the bed and reached out to touch the dark, unmoving form. Grace. Suddenly, I sensed something behind me and turned. But I was too late. I caught a quick glimpse of something swinging towards my head, and the world exploded into a bright flash. as I slowly sank to the ground. The last thing I saw was the shocking identity of my attacker. In Grace's room. Unfortunately, you're unable to solve the crime. The story changes greatly. Read carefully. So that was another bad ending, as you would imagine. So, Grace obviously seems dead right here. We got killed by the killer, and you would imagine the girls wouldn't be far off. Once again, I'd like to point out that the killer likely has access to the room somehow or another. You know, either maybe kick down the door, though I think we would have heard that, but more than likely, he has the master key. So, not such a great way to go. We'll be right back in just a minute, and we're going to continue on in the next video to the next one. In fact, let me go take a look. This one... Okay, yeah, this one should go fairly quickly. So we'll be right back.